there's 5 major patterns that have been identified as new ways of doing business that is slightly different from the traditional way of looking at economics, and which are quite successful. So the first one is called the unbundled business model. So many companies attempt to bundle their businesses in such a way that they have essentially 3 businesses in one company. A business which is focused on creating customer relationships and serving the customers, which is a highly expensive business. A business which is focused on creating innovative products all the time, which requires a totally different culture. And a third business, which is an infrastructural business. And the problem is that all of these have totally different requirements, they require different cultures, and they don't work well together. Nevertheless, that's how we do most of our companies. So the unbundled business model says, don't try to fix it, just separate them into separate businesses. One which is focused on creating economies of scope, so creating relationships, and is run as a high-value business, generally consolidated to be able to reach a lot of customers. One which is a pure infrastructure model, which is the one that tries to drive the cost down and optimizes its processes to be extremely efficient. And again, is one which is quite, aggregated. And a third one, which is a collection of many small parties innovating in the product space, high-value propositions. So that's the first pattern. So some of you actually started already looking at your business models using some of this thinking, so it's probably useful to push it far. I have put on your tables, by the way, another set of printouts which summarize the characteristics of these different patterns, so you can use them as we move on. Keep in mind for this that one of the things that makes this kind of model work really well is if you can create an ecosystem where these are partners, where you have an infrastructure business that is partnering with a relationship business and lots of guys in the middle that are their partners doing innovation. If you look at what's happening in some of the disruptions in the banking sector, they're happening in this space and in this space. But the unbundling hasn't happened yet, but banks are being pushed to unbundle, but positioning them in here, which is probably not a good place to be. In any case, you don't have the choice of it. One of the businesses that has done this successfully is the mobile telecom business. That's what they've done 10 years ago. Second, long tail. So long tail is starting from one of the assumptions that we have about the business, which says that in order to have an effective business, it is not a good idea to produce personalized products because these are very expensive. So in other words, if you want to serve a niche market, you should consolidate your revenue streams so that most of the things you produce are nearly the same, or otherwise you have to charge very high premium prices. The long tail says, not the case. They say you can serve a niche market where you produce personalized value, which is nearly individually targeted, individually customized, and that at a very low cost. So instead of having your focus on the top consolidated products, have 5 products and sell them to many customers, you sell thousands of products, each one to very few customers. The trick in this thing is to be able to produce this at a very low cost. And if you remember the Lego model, that's what exactly they're doing. And they're doing it by using a trick in the production chain. So having the guys who consume the products produce them themselves. So most of the time when you see a long-tail business model, it will be enabled by another mechanic, by another business model. Like either a platform business where there's other businesses contributing, or like a community of free workers, like a free or open business model that are producing it. On its own, hard to make it work, except if technology makes it easy to customize products very cheaply. And again, thinking of the disruptors we've gone through, that's something to think about when you start thinking about big data and things like that. To what extent the production costs can go down to such an extent that you can really customize nearly to an individual a particular product or service. Multi-sided platforms. So this is the model where you create a marketplace. This is your iTunes, this is your App Store. And it depends on having several communities that are interacting successfully there. And you need to cater to all of them. Each multi-sided platform is slightly different. Some of them you have a simple, one community produces value that the other one consumes. Some of them, like advertising, add on top of other things. You simply want access to the membership that is there. Some of them have very complex interactions. But the mechanics is always, that you have an interdependence of the value that is produced and consumed between several different segments. And the business itself is focused on providing the most efficient means of distributing this value and communication. So plugging people in. One of the technologies that has made this particularly interesting is the APIs technology. So the opening up of applications and being able to have things plugged together has started making this a very interesting business model. Typical for this business model is revenue sharing. So you have multiple players that all participate at an equal level, and they get a share in the production of the revenue. Free. Another of those business models that has cropped up in the last few years, especially with the advent of open source. And there's different flavors of it as well. I'll outline a couple. Generally what you have is that a large community gets a base service and doesn't pay for it. And a small community gets a premium service and pays a lot. So the large community benefits from being subsidized by the smaller community. That's one way of looking at it. A flavor of it being you buy a thing, there's levels of usage and subscription, base service is free, but everything you want to have on top, any value, is charged for. And a third model is I give you something for free because that obliges you to buy stuff from me all the time and I get recurring revenues. And the last one is a business model which at the moment applies mainly in the innovation field, so the open business model, but it can be extended to other things. So the open business model basically says R&D is expensive, and R&D used inside companies does not necessarily produce always the best results. So how can we take our R&D capability and either outsource it, so have an ecosystem around the company that does innovation, or how can we take our innovation capability and transform it into a value because we cannot monetize it. So things like, I don't know if you've ever heard, but Innocentive and Procter & Gamble are two of the names that crop up in this conversation a lot. So they have created platforms where they connect people who can innovate with people who have problems, or where people who have innovation stuff that they produce but they cannot use can publish it so that other people can buy it and use it. Now, the interesting thing about this is that where it comes from is realizing that you have capability inside which you're not using in some way. Thinking of Amazon that I used as an example earlier, it was exactly the same case of them saying, we have all this capacity sitting around that we need in order to do our peak days, but we're not using it most of the time. So how can we transform this into a value that we sell to somebody else that today is not our customer? So that's one of the logics that you should apply as well to the business models you have, saying, what is it that we have today that is costly, but is valuable? And are we getting enough of this as a value? So can we transform it into something we sell to other people who potentially could use it? So these are the patterns. Keep them at the top of your mind. I'll just have them around. You have them on your desks. You can use them to systematically play around with your models. Now, the way we're going to do this, the way I propose to do it, is the following. First of all, it seems that again, if you want to switch, we'll do, but it seems that you've all started thinking a lot deeper into your own subject, so I would suggest you stay with the same group of people and continue based on the areas you've been exploring. Take some of the technologies we've looked at, and I've just listed them here as a reminder. So big data, analytics, wearables, social and crowd, telematics and gamification. You can pick one or you can work with several of them, doesn't matter. And look first in your model. Do any of these disrupt any of the elements at the current model you have? If they do, how? And if they do disrupt it, how can you counter this? What can you do to adjust the other elements using the different patterns to actually turn this into a more profitable situation? If you wish to work just on the model without even looking at any of these and say how can you actually simply innovate what's there, that's perfectly fine as well. I have the capability to test numbers as well if you want, but I think we should decide this when we get a little bit closer towards the end. So basically if you want to run simulations on some of these models, once you have a stable version, we can input it and run it. I think we may be a little bit too early for that, but let's see how we progress, and if you want to do that, we can do it. Yeah?
What's the timing on this? How long are we going to give them?
So I'm going to give you an hour and a half to work on this, because it's going to take a while to actually figure out how to do it.